This is Ray Hadley in the morning, right across Australia.
And good morning and welcome. Thursday the 9th of September. I'm Ray Hadley. Great to have your company on 2GB, 2CC, 4BC, stations on the Capital Radio, Midwest Radio Grant Broadcaster Resonate Networks, and listeners on the 2GB, 4BC apps. A top of 27 in the city of Sydney, about the same out west, a top of 25 in Brisbane, and we'll check the weather across the rest of the listening area shortly. And no matter where you are, the number is the same, 131873. Email me either rayhadley.com, 2gb.com, 4bc.com.au. Access information from the program by going to facebook.com/The Ray Hadley Morning Show. Well, it's Are You OK Day today, obviously at this time in our history. Plenty of people are not okay, so do me a favour, check on family, check on friends, either a text or a phone call, because in most circumstances you can't see them unless you live in the same household, and obviously you know whether they're okay or not if you're living with them, or you'd hope to. But just check on people in your lives that you haven't spoken to for a while and make sure they're okay on Are You OK Day. Well, in Victoria, what I thought might happen is starting to happen. We had a couple of days at 246, one back to 221, I think, from memory, and now it goes out to 324. And the Premier in Victoria, Daniel Andrews, is genuinely worried that they're going to tumble down the path of New South Wales very, very quickly. 217 remain under investigation, 107 of 324 linked to current outbreaks, and obviously they haven't checked how many were infectious in the community because, quite simply, they don't know. It's a big day, we hope, for parts of regional New South Wales. I've been talking about this for a week or more. With an announcement, lockdowns will ease tomorrow for the mid-north coast, the far north coast, the northwest, the Riverina, Murrumbidgee. Now that means the New England and also, or parts of the New England and the Hunter Valley won't come out of lockdown. Those upper areas of the New England probably will, but no way out of lockdown for the Central Coast after, I think they've had 37 cases in 2 days in that area. South Coast also a problem, they won't come out of lockdown. But southern parts of New South Wales will. As far as Greater Sydney is concerned, there are stories left, right and centre today about pubs being open next month now, and that's only for some local government areas where we've got high vaccination rates. And fully vaccinated Sydneysiders expect to be able to enjoy their first drink at a pub or a club by the end of October. I'm more interested to know when kids get back to school, to tell you the truth. I think that's a really important step that we need to take before we get to the pub or the club, as the case may be. They're talking about hairdressers being open towards the end of next month as well. But all these things will only be for people who've had both doses of the jab. That's what they're telling me here. Now, there is a story as well circulating that the government at the Crisis Cabinet meeting, we'll get all the information in a couple of hours from Gladys Berejiklian, to a certain extent overruled medical advice. Now, she's been talking, Gladys Berejiklian, about 70 to 80% before she gets to opening doors and removing some lockdown opportunities. But just at the moment, there's a bit of a conundrum for her because Dr. Chant and many other medical experts, and I'll talk to one of them today, are talking closer to 90%. They're saying there's a danger at 70 to 80%. You get to 85 and you're probably on safer ground. 90% and you've probably got what they call herd immunity. There'll always be a percentage of people who are anti-vaxxers by definition. And now we've got this new breed of people that email me every day saying, look, I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but, and then give you a reason or number of reasons why they won't have COVID-19. By definition, you're anti-vaxxers as far as I'm concerned. You can't be selective about getting vaccinated. Either you're with us or you're against us. And those against I describe as anti-vaxxers. And you can portray any particular angle you like. But at the end of the day, I'll illustrate you today through discussions with experts that there are very few instances where you can claim that you would be impacted by having a vaccine because of a medical problem. Professor Graham Stewart, the clinical immunologist at the Westmead Institute for Medical Research and a clinical professor of medicine. Now, I get these dopes like that imbecile yesterday, David in West Pymble, saying, I take my advice from specialists. Well, you better be listening today, you dope, because he's a specialist confirming what I've been saying for quite some time. Vaccination's the way out of all of this. If you keep finding excuses, well, we'll have two pieces of society into the future. We'll have those who are out of trouble with double vaccinations and those like you who will have a pandemic of the unvaccinated. That's what we'll have. Anyway, we'll see what happens. Now, Anastasia Palaszczuk. I mean, really? It's just absolutely breathtakingly, mind-numbingly stupid what she has done and continues to do. And this time it's about a little baby from Queensland. Now, you've heard the story all morning about this, and we've heard from Jesse Evans, the mother of 4-month-old Rocker. He suffers from a serious spinal muscular problem. Now, the only place they could get treatment for the poor little fella was in Sydney, and they drove down there from Jindawi, their property in rural Queensland. It's 250k west of Brisbane, out towards Dalby. So they're there on that property. They come to Sydney because it's the only place that this poor little fella can be treated. So they apply on compassionate grounds to come back after the treatment, and the future of this poor little fella doesn't look good at all. Angel Flight say, look, we'll fly them to a private, sterile airstrip near their home in a sterile aircraft. But what they're saying now, Jessie and the poor little fella will be forced to isolate in a hospital in Brisbane for 2 weeks, while the husband, Billy, stays in a hotel quarantine at the family's expense, costing them precious time together as a family. Now, you'd hope that the Premier doesn't know about this. You'd hope that the Chief Medical Officer doesn't know about it. And you'd hope that if they don't know about it, today they'll put this all right and get that little fella back home with his mum and dad at that remote rural property in Queensland. It's a shocking case and a latest example of Queensland health officials refusing to accommodate special needs despite the family's mother asking the Premier to show a bit of thought and compassion. I mean, this is a really desperate situation for this family, and they need to be shown compassion. And I think the mother said it rather eloquently this morning in an interview I saw. If you're an AFL, NRL player, wife, girlfriend or official, you get special treatment. If you're actually a constituent of Queensland, you get treated like an imbecile. Neil Breen spoke to Jessie this morning as well as that TV interview I saw a little bit earlier. So just on the figures from yesterday in New South Wales, and again we had 1,480. And looking at the figures, 152 in Blacktown, 47 Penrith, Cumberland 207, 40 in Parramatta. In Hornsby only 2, Hillshire 10, Campbelltown 34, Camden 20, Liverpool 138, 15 in the Shire, Sutherland Shire. And then you get to the other hotspots, and again, Canterbury Bankstown leads the way, 289. And the figures are always in the mid to high 200s in Canterbury. Come what may. Strathfield 31, Canada Bay 3, Burwood 8, the Inner West 27, 64 in the City of Sydney, Bayside 31, Randwick 20, Waverley 2. Randwick's a problem. Wellara 7, Mossman. And then you heard the suburbs announced yesterday that are of some concern to the health officers, and we're talking about Marrickville and surrounding suburbs where it appears the virus is growing, and they're imploring people there to get tested. Please get tested. Now, the blueprint for the return to school, I'm reminded, October 25, Kindy in Year 1, November 1, Years 2, 6 and 11, from November 8, Years 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9 and 10. That's the roadmap for Term 4. But, I mean, it's all about when the pubs are going to be open. If the pub's going to be open earlier than the 25th of October, the question would be asked, why don't the children go back to school? Because there's another story today I'll get to later in the day about how children younger than 12 seem to be catching the virus but not passing it on, so to speak, and are dealing with it much better than people older than that, which flies in the face of what the Premier of Queensland, of course, told us, Anastasia Palaszczuk, some time ago. Christina Keneally, former Labor Premier in New South Wales, the most unsuccessful Labor Premier since Federation, and I'll tell you why. Now, for some bizarre reason, federal Labor seem to think that she is the answer. Well, she's the answer. The question's too hard. Now, there's a deal being done as I speak to parachute her into a safe seat in southwestern Sydney. Fowler. She currently resides on Scotland Island in Pittwater. She'd have to, of course, get some sort of accommodation out in that electorate to be in that electorate. Now, at the moment, there's a battle for the contest in the Senate between Christina Keneally and another Senator, Deborah O'Neill, for the right winnable spot on the Senate ticket. So, even a Labor source said the move would upset rank-and-file party members in Fowler who've been vocal in their calls for a candidate who represents the diverse community in that area. Several Labor MPs have expressed concern. Now, I'm not here to tell Anthony Albanese how to suck eggs when it comes to this, or the right faction power broker Tony Burke, who says we need to make sure we have Christina Keneally in Parliament. Really, Tony? Now, you're a man with judgment normally. Tony, just let me remind you what Christina Keneally did. In 2011, the New South Wales election, 32 seats were lost in New South Wales and drove the ALP vote down to 24% under her stewardship. It's now been more than a decade, and the damage caused has seen New South Wales Labor in oblivion ever since, for the last decade. Then after that failure, somehow someone thought it would be a good idea to put her against John Alexander for the seat of Bennelong in 2017. Massive resources were given to her from the Labor Party machine, and in pre-polling she was expected to knock over John Alexander. She didn't get within cooey of John Alexander. So after her failure to win Bennelong, she is parachuted into a vacant Senate position, replacing Sam Dastari. So then we go forward to, oh, by the way, Ed Husick, a very capable MP from Western Sydney, was forced to step down from the Shadow Ministry to make way for her. He's now been elevated with Joel Fitzgibbon and resigning. But then all of a sudden, after being elevated to the Senate in 2017, she takes centre stage in the 2019 disaster for Bill Shorten. She was basically with Bill every step of the way. And they thought it would be good to have, this woman, a powerful woman, in the company of Bill Shorten to illustrate that women will play a significant role in a Labor win. And everyone from News Poll down thought that Morrison was gone and the Liberal National Party would be booted from government. And so she was centre stage of all of that. And they lost the unlosable election. Not blaming her entirely, but she was there as part of it. Are you seeing some sort of pattern here? I mean, even with his blinkers on, Tony Burke must see a pattern. And here's the pattern. The electorate don't like her, Tony. They don't like her. And I don't know, it's a bit hard to judge why they don't like her. She seems like a pleasant woman. I don't like her ideas much. She seems to go on the attack. She lets off the leash by, Labor Party operatives to attack the government from time to time. And usually that's the domain of other people, not her, but she seems to relish that opportunity. Good luck to her. But the bottom line is this. The electorate don't copper. They don't copper. They didn't copper in New South Wales in 2011. They don't copper federally at Bennelong in 2017. They don't copper in 2019. And they won't copper in 2021 or 2022, old mate. But it'll be on your head. She'll no doubt win Fowler because I think it's a 63% vote for the Labor Party up there. But, I mean, really? I don't understand Labor's fascination with Christina Keneally, and I absolutely never will. I never will. There's another story that we need to deal with today, and it's about Facebook. Now, it's very complex after a High Court ruling. And it's not just about people like Nine Network that own this radio station and publish the Herald and run the TV network, and News Corp who run, radio stations and print operations, and Channel 10 and Channel 7. They have the capacity to look after themselves. But those people who go on Facebook, now just say community Facebook pages, and they're all over Australia, well-intended people, and they invite comment from their local community. Well, millions of Australians with Facebook or other social media pages could be taken to court and forced to pay damage to third parties if defamatory comments are posted on their sites, even without their knowledge. The High Court yesterday upheld a ruling making anyone with a Facebook or other social media page liable for adverse material in the comment sections of those pages, even if they don't know it's there. The decision, which has sparked calls for urgent defamation law reform, could have far-reaching consequences for institutions, companies, sporting organisations and individuals. I mean, and already I think the message went through. Many of the individuals who basically run those sort of accounts will close them down for fear of being in the courts. Not because of what they've put on the site, but what they invite people to put on the site, even though they don't know that it's on the site. Once it appears, of course, it's their fault. Now, just from my own personal point of view, I'd prefer a life without Facebook, to tell you the truth, except when I want to look at my grandkids or catch up on news with my family. But obviously the media company for which I work, they want to put things on social media, and, you know, I'm expected to partake in all of that. I wouldn't have a clue what goes on my website. It's organised by our digital department, and on Facebook and the rest of it. I really don't know. I know they want us to go more to 2gb.com and 4bc.com.au because there's no money to be made by us in Facebook. You know, we don't get a share of the revenue there as far as I know. But, I mean, if a story like the story on Guy Sebastian this week is posted, I cop an absolute pizzling from the anti-vaxxers. The most horrible things are said. Now, it gets and by the way, horrible things are said about other people as well. But thankfully, I've got staff that moderate it and get rid of that immediately. You know, if there's some attack on someone that's defamatory, even if the person has been attacked by me, and I draw a line about where I go because I don't want to be in the courts regularly. So, but then people come on and they make outrageous claims against people, and you have got all sorts of drama. So I moderate it, and not personally, but my staff moderate it, and they get rid of those defamatory things. And I guess News Corp and Channel 9 and the Sydney Morning Herald and others will have to do the same, even though they're not the publisher of it, but they do own that particular site. The problem being, for all you people out there, just say that there's a community forum for your local soccer club, your local rugby league club, your local netball club, and there's a blue about something that happened. And all of a sudden, people get out of control. They get on the drink one night and they put something up and defame someone else. Well, if you're the convener of that particular page, you're in strife, according to the High Court. You're in a stack of strife. So, I mean, it's very, very. I don't think I've ever sued anyone. Probably threatened a few at different times, but I've never sued anyone because, I mean, I'm usually the sued, not the suer. But the simple fact of the matter is, if I'm to be held liable for things that people say, even though I might vehemently disagree with them, and somehow they slip through to the wicketkeeper and get on some sort of page that my name's attached to, well, I'm in a stack of strife. And I'll probably be protected by the company if I inadvertently do that. But you people out there that don't have the resources of Channel 9 or News Corp or Channel 10 or Channel 7 or Fairfax, and you're just in a community sense, you know, running it out of the goodness of your heart, and someone gets on there and starts saying horrible things about someone, you know, calls them a pedophile or calls them something else, well, which they're not, well, all of a sudden, you're in the firing line. No wonder people said there needs to be some sort of legislative change in relation to that. I mean, the defamation courts are a minefield as it is, without this decision, which is impacting on everyone by the High Court, and it's now in law. That's what the High Court says. There's no other appeal process. The High Court says this, so that's the way it's just going to be from here on in. Anyway, Chris Merritt's done a fairly good job at analysing this in the Australian newspaper. I'll have a look at that a little bit later. And as I said later this morning, Professor Graham Stewart, the clinical immunologist at the Westmead Institute of Medical Research, will join me for the Davids of West Pymble and the rest to debunk all the myths. And instead of writing me, say, I listen to no, you listen to Dr. Google, mate. You go on Dr. Google. Ivermectin and all the rest. It's Dr. Google. It's not someone as distinguished as a professor of clinical immunology at Westmead Institute of Medical Research. Anyway, we'll talk about that a little bit later in the program as well. And the Taliban, well, thanks, Scoop. Guess who they've appointed to be in key positions? And it's documented in the papers today and on the TV and on the radio. They're all terrorists. They're all terrorists occupying senior positions in the newly formed and illegally formed government of Afghanistan. They're all terrorists. Now, Suncorp Stadium, as Peter Bedell mentioned yesterday, it will be the site of the grand final. Good luck to them in Brisbane. Fantastic. The Australian Rugby League Commission reached agreement with the Queensland Government to host the remainder of the final series after the New South Wales Government confirmed it couldn't have the grand final because of the COVID pandemic. And the tickets are going on sale. Please get them from the ticketing agencies that are affiliated with the NRL. Don't go to Viagogo, because all you do is you pay your money, you won't get a seat, and you'll do your money cold. They're thieves. Just on that, tomorrow night, Melbourne Storm play Manly. Continuous call team will call that game from the Sunshine Coast. Saturday, 2 games, Roosters and Gold Coast Titans. That's a knockout game. The game on Friday night is not a knockout game. The Roosters Gold Coast, of course, that's a knockout game. 5v8. And then the second game is Penrith v South Sydney. That's 2v3. That comes in from Townsville. And then the final game is a knockout game on Sunday. It's Parramatta taking on the Newcastle Knights. That's 6v7. Sydney Swans co-captain Luke Parker has re-signed with the club for a further 4 seasons. Well done to him. And a stack of other sport we'll get to, including news coming in from the US Open as well. If you'd like to call me, 131873 is the number. Email me, 2gb.com, rayhadley.com, 4bc.com.au. Podcast videos and program content by going to facebook.com/The Ray Hadley Morning Show. I'm Ray Hadley on 2GB, 2CC, 4BC, stations on Capital Radio, Midwest Radio Grant broadcaster, Resonate Networks, and listeners on the 2GB and 4BC apps. Peter Dutton is the Defence Minister. He's in Jakarta. He's on the line right now. Minister, good morning.
Good morning, Ray.
What's happening in Jakarta?
Well, we've got meetings up here with the Defence Minister, and obviously a very important relationship for us in the region. And we'll meet with our counterparts, Maurice Payne and I, this morning to talk about joint training exercises, the way that we can hopefully work more closely together. And it's an important time, as we know, for the Indo-Pacific, for our region. So we've got those meetings scheduled, and it should be a productive day.
How's COVID looking in Indonesia, particularly in Jakarta?
It's pretty rough, Ray. They've got a sort of a partial lockdown, I suppose I'd describe it at the moment, but they've had millions of cases up here, and obviously the Delta strain has knocked them around again, but they're trying to roll out a vaccine as quickly as they can. Obviously, the population over 200 million. It's a very difficult circumstance, and obviously we've provided support and aid and some of the vaccines to help them vaccinate their population. And they're doing it tough. There's no question about that.
Did you get my text last night?
Sorry, Ray, you just cut out then.
I said, did you get my text? I got your number off of Vet Darth. Did you get my text last night?
No, but some poor random bloke, I think, got it. He obviously is being bombarded with texts from someone he doesn't know.
I know it's not comical, but it is, because she says she's been talking to you. You then reply on social media saying, I haven't heard from her, I don't know what you're talking about. So she holds out the phone to the gathered media in Brisbane, said, see? And then a rather smart young reporter, Tim Arvia from Brisbane, one of his colleagues from Channel 7, looks at it and says, Minister, that's not his number. Oh, okay. Right, I better resend. What is the right number, sort of thing? So, I mean, this woman's in charge of Queensland Health, which is a major problem, a major problem, obviously. But I guess we all make mistakes.
Yeah,
Vaccination rates. Yeah, sorry, as you were about to say.
Yeah, I think that's right. No, I think that's right. I think the trouble is it overshadows the more substantive issues. I mean, we're trying to get our troops back from overseas, and they're going through a process with Queensland Health, but it also overshadows the fact that, there are many families, as we saw in that footage on Father's Day at Tweed Heads, who are just in horrible circumstances, small businesses on the Tweed there and, right across the country at the moment, who are going broke and doing it tough. And for those Queenslanders who are stuck outside of Queensland because we're told there are no hotel rooms for them to quarantine, I just think it's an absurdity, and they need to come back home as quickly as they can. The mental health problems being created here, and the separation, the divide, the stress within families is unbelievable, and they need to stop it. And I think that was the main point yesterday that probably got missed because got the numbers in the wrong order or something.
In relation to this, I mean, you have in Queensland, your home state, the worst vaccination rates in the Commonwealth. And it's not getting any better despite texting. And these messages that came firstly from Dr. Young, who's about to become the Governor of Queensland, they're having a serious impact. Now, I'll give you an example. A pharmacist in Logan, which is an area where people should be getting vaccinated, has a fridge stock with 60 vials of AstraZeneca, which equivalent to 600 doses, but he's only administered about 10 doses of that vaccine in the past week. I mean, doesn't that tell you that the message is not getting out there to the rank and file?
Well, obviously it does, Ray, I think we've got to be very serious about it in Queensland. In New South Wales, people understand because they've got friends who are living in lockdown, or they're living in lockdown in harsh conditions themselves at the moment, and they know that the government's plan has been very clear that they need to get to that 70 or 80% double vaccination rate. And in Queensland, we're fortunate at the moment because we're not in a period of lockdown, but I think it's been demonstrated through a couple of minor outbreaks recently that the Delta strain could come across the border at any time with a truck driver, with a train driver, with somebody who's visiting family, a nurse, somebody in hotel quarantine, and then it's off. And then we're in the situation that New South Wales or Victoria finds themselves in. And I think there's a level of complacency, and I think there's also been an undermining of confidence. The AstraZeneca rollout has gone very poorly in Queensland because Dr. Young and the Health Minister and the Premier were, making statements early on, which I'm sure they regret now. But the rollout of AstraZeneca has been much more successful in other states, and we need to pick that up. And it's not a blame shifting thing. I think people have had a gutful of all of that. They just want this over and done with, and kids back at school and leading a life as they knew it before. So we need to get that vaccination rate up in Queensland. And again, we've done it repeatedly on your show, but people need to have discussion with their kids or their grandkids and get the vaccination as quickly as possible so that we can get to the other side of this dreadful time.
New South Wales Health Minister produced figures which I can't get access to right now because they're a 2-week delay, but the last time I got them, and that was very early this month and late August, 75% of people with the virus are unvaccinated. And then you go to those in ICU, and a very small number of those people are double dosed. Out of, say, nearly 200 in New South Wales, the vast majority are unvaccinated. I mean, it's there as plain as a nose on your face. If 75% of people getting the virus are unvaccinated, you don't need to be Einstein or an immunologist to realise the best way out of this is to get double vaxxed.
I think that's exactly right, Ray. And if you don't believe it in Australia, look at what's happened elsewhere around the world, and look at the hospitalisation rates, which is what a country like the UK looks at, or the death rates now, which are much dramatically lower. Look at the circumstances in Victoria 18 months ago, where people were dying in aged care facilities, and now that they've been vaccinated in New South Wales, we're just not having those deaths. And the evidence is there for people to see and to examine. And as we've said before, speak to your GP. There's not a credible doctor around that's not advising for people to get the vaccine. So as quickly as possible, hopefully, some of the parochial nonsense that's there at the moment drops away as well. We are one country. I'm as parochial a Queenslander as the next, but we don't abandon family or friends or allies. We take care of each other, and we are one country. And at the moment, New South Wales in particular, and I think Victoria probably only a couple of weeks behind them, is going through a tough circumstance, and Queensland could be there tomorrow. And we would want assistance from New South Wales and Western Australia if that were the case. And I think rightly we expect that people would, literally roll their sleeves up and do the right thing. So let's, get on with it and get through this to Christmas and have as good a Christmas as we can with our families, and perhaps some people reunited from across borders and from across the other side of the world, and put this behind us.
Okay, travel safely. Thanks for your time. We'll talk next week.
Thanks, Racy, mate.
Defence Minister Peter Dutton from Jakarta. Just stories coming out of the UK, because we've used that as an example the last couple of weeks about the number of people, as they have Freedom Day, or had it quite some time ago, and they don't publish the figures of people getting the virus anymore, even though it's, on some cases, 30,000 plus. But I noticed that the UK Prime Minister was interviewed in the hospital he was treated at when he had the virus himself. Now, he said he's very concerned about the consistently high new cases occurring daily. He also said he's concerned with the figures showing that 75% of those being treated in hospital are not vaccinated. So it's pretty much replicated in Australia. The pathway out of this, even after Freedom Day, is vaccination, because the vast majority of people entering hospital in the UK, and not all of them are going to hospital, of those people, of course, that get the virus on a daily basis, 30,000 or more, but those that are hospitalised, 75% being treated in hospital are not vaccinated. Surely to goodness that's not too hard to understand. It's good to have your company. About to be joined by a very distinguished professor, Professor Graham Stewart, clinical immunologist at the Westmead Institute for Medical Research, clinical professor of medicine at the University of Sydney. Professor, good morning to you.
Good morning, Ray.
Well, I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time, so thank you for being able to present some time for us to have a yarn about it.
It's an absolute pleasure. And look, before we start, can I say that I really admire what you're doing to try to get people across the line with COVID vaccination. And I think every frontline nurse, doctor, allied health professional, paramedic and others would agree with me. You've got a big audience for whom you're a trusted voice, and I really welcome the opportunity to help you in your campaign.
Well, that's very kind of you, very, very kind of you, because sometimes, Professor, you think you're fighting a losing battle, but I won't give up, I can tell you that. It seems that the government's chosen in New South Wales 70 to 80% the figure targeted in relation to lockdowns, but I also read today that Dr. Chant, the Chief Medical Officer, would be more comfortable with 85 to 90%. Now, where do you lie in relation to the double vax? What percentage do we need before we can be sort of looking at herd immunity?
Okay, so there's several questions within one. Let me take them one at a time.
Right.
The first thing is that my understanding is that about 3% of the population are hardcore anti-vaxxers. Right. So where I lie is that we ought to work together, and I put a challenge to you and to your audience that the people in New South Wales get to 97% vaccinated. There's no reason why we can't do that. We're actually already over 90% for people like me over the age of 60, and we're knocking on 80% for everyone over the age of 40. Below that, it's smaller because the people of younger age were only brought into vaccination at last, and of course the lowest of all are the 12 to 15-year-olds for whom vaccination doesn't start until next week. So the challenge is we just get together as a community and get to 97%. So why do I place it so high?
Yeah.
And I'll come back to the reasons. I'll come back to the challenges we have to get to 97. The reason I put it so high is that at 70%, yes, there are certain freedoms that we will get, but they're by and large not the highest order freedoms. So yes, I'd love to go back to a restaurant and I'd love to travel. But the freedoms that I really care about is freedom from people dying from COVID, freedom for people dying of any cause alone, freedom from people in their 80s and 90s in aged care with families just down the road that they can't see, people who put their whole life savings into small businesses and then lost the lot, the mental health impacts on younger people and the educational impacts on school kids. They're the freedoms we want to be free of, and we're not going to be totally free of those at 70, and we're certainly not going to be free of them even at 80. I know there's discussion about the fact that people die from influenza and therefore we just have to accept deaths. Well, as a doctor, I never accept a death that's avoidable. And if we get to 97%, the number of deaths will be really, really small. The number of people getting infected will be small, but it'll be even a smaller percentage that will actually be coming very sick from it and ending up in ICU. My hospital, Westmead, where I worked for 40 years until I retired from clinical work to focus just on research and teaching last year, is just overwhelmed at the moment. 160 inpatients, 30-odd in intensive care, and it's going to get worse. We need to do as a community just everything we can to bring that to an end as quickly as possible and to stop it from happening again. and 80%, in my view, won't do that. 80% is a reasonable time to start giving some freedoms, and that's also to give people encouragement to get vaccinated, because if you're not vaccinated, you won't get those freedoms. So I completely understand why they're being put forward. But I think, to quote Kerry Chant, when she asked what percentage should it be, a few days ago, she said the sky's the limit. I agree with her, but the limit, I think, is probably 97%. That's the sky. Okay,
we get this mantra, and there's a couple of emails. No, not a couple. I get heaps of emails. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but. And there's always a but.
Yep.
And the next line is, I can get this and I can get that, and I can't do it because I've got this and got that. Are there a list of reasons why someone should not be vaccinated against COVID-19? Is there a large portion or a very minute portion of people who shouldn't be vaccinated?
Right, it's a really critical question. And I have, before I answer it, which I will in detail, can I say that a lot of the vaccine hesitancy is due to mixed messages coming from people who I think could have done it better. Right. Most people who are hesitant are reasonable people. I think that's very likely to be so. And they're just waiting to hear the sort of reassurance that I hope I'm about to give. So this concept that you can't be vaccinated against COVID for medical reasons or on medical grounds, I've been asked that often as a clinical immunologist, who are these people? And the short answer is they do not exist. There is a COVID vaccine product for everyone. Some people can't take Pfizer and some people can't take AstraZeneca, although the percentages are way under 1% of people, more like 1 in 1,000 who can't. Let me quickly run through those conditions. The first area where people have been frightened off is people who suffer from allergies, but that's 20% of the Australian population. Severe life-threatening allergy or anaphylaxis to these vaccines is extremely low, way under 1 in 1,000. And people who in the past have had anaphylaxis or severe allergic reaction to drugs, to stinging insects, to foods, are only about 1 in 1,000 Australians. So if you've had anaphylaxis in the past, talk to your GP. But these vaccines do not contain foods, latex, other chemicals that have been known to be associated. And the evidence over the years that vaccines actually lead to anaphylaxis is extremely weak. The evidence for these vaccines show that it's extremely rare. We've never before in medicine been able to tap into data on 1 million or 100 million doses, and that's what we have for Pfizer in the United States. So the side effect rate is extremely well documented. It's very, very low. There is a chemical called polyethylene glycol, or PEG, which is in the Pfizer vaccine, and the very rare 1 in 1 million Australians who are known to be allergic to PEG should not get Pfizer, but it isn't in the AstraZeneca vaccine. The second group that we hear a little bit about are those who have had clotting in the past because of this rare syndrome that occurs with the AstraZeneca. If you've had clots in the past, or members have had clots in the past, that is not a reason at all to avoid AstraZeneca. It isn't actually the side effect, the difficult side effect isn't actually just a clotting disorder. It's an autoimmune disorder. You make antibodies against the little clotting cells called platelets, and that forces the clots to occur. If you've had a deep venous thrombosis or a pulmonary embolus, all those clots in the past, they are in no sense a reason not to have AstraZeneca. You are at no increased risk of this rare TTS syndrome if you've had it. So that's a significant group of people that need that reassurance. If they get to their GP, the GP will say, look, what I'm saying is completely correct. You don't have to worry about that if you've had clots in the past. The only people who shouldn't get AstraZeneca actually fall into, again, less than 0.1% of the population, no dent on that 97% total, are people who have had a syndrome similar to this rare TTS in the past, and they are extremely, extremely rare. For the Pfizer vaccine, for young men, there is a small risk of developing inflammation around the heart or in the heart muscle. Again, you're looking at less than 0.1% of the population, and 6 months after, and those people can get AstraZeneca. So I come back to what I said. for people, the statement that people can't be vaccinated for medical reasons, those people don't exist. But a lot of people have a reasonable concern that they shouldn't get the vaccine because of their health problem. And that's, as I said, a lot to do with the mixed messaging. They go and talk to their GP and they'll get reassured, I hope.
Now, yeah, let's all hope. I'm interested in that Pfizer thing you just spoke about there. There's a young bloke who works for Channel 7 called Denham Hitchcock. I don't know the young fella, but he's been rather active and his employers aren't too happy with him. He's got this rare condition known as, and correct me if I'm wrong, pericarditis, I think it's called.
Pericarditis, yep.
Okay, pericarditis. After having the first of 2 Pfizer jabs, and all of a sudden he's a bit crook because of it. Is that what you're referring to about one of the rare things that can happen with Pfizer, with young men?
Look, it could be due to the Pfizer vaccine, but I must say that pericarditis, even in young men, does happen for other reasons. And you raise a very important point. If there's any concern, his second dose just should be AstraZeneca. This side effect doesn't happen with the AstraZeneca. So there's 2 issues here. One is who should be cautious about having the first dose. And I've said almost nobody, certainly less than a fraction of a percent. But then there's a second issue, is who should be cautious with the second dose. And obviously if you've had an adverse reaction to one, you just swap to the other. We have good evidence to show that starting with one and getting the other is very effective. You don't have to have 2 of the same in order to get the benefit. A little bit of evidence, if you have one first and a different one later, you actually get a better longer-term protection, but that's kind of a little bit irrelevant. The really important point is if your doctor's concerned about a possible side effect from either Pfizer or AstraZeneca, just get the other one for your second jab.
So if, in fact, this young bloke, he's 40, by the way, if, in fact, he did suffer this because of Pfizer, he just goes to AstraZeneca, he doesn't have the same problem, if, in fact, it caused that, which it may not have, as you've pointed out.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And let me say, Ray, 40 is young. for me anyway.
Hey,
yeah, look,
I think, Professor, I think I've got you covered. I don't know how, you said you're over 60. I'm 67 in 2 weeks, and I've got double dose of AstraZeneca. I'm as fit as a mallee bull.
Yeah, well, I'd like to think I'm the same. I'm nearly a decade older than you, and I've had 2 doses of AstraZeneca. Let me just address the issue about AstraZeneca, because we're getting a lot of pushback from Queensland, as you know.
Yeah.
So I had no concern about getting AstraZeneca. 2 reasons. The first is the risk is very, very small. In my age group, it's about 1 in 50,000 of getting it, and only 1 in a million of dying from it. But the second reason has not been in the media, I don't think, well enough, and that is that I knew that if I developed any odd symptoms 4 to 30 days after my first dose, then there are 2 simple, cheap tests that will tell me as early warning signs that I'm developing this rare syndrome, and it's very treatable. The earlier you diagnose it, the more certain you are that you will not die from it. So these tests are called a platelet count, which is done in a test called a full blood count, and a test for clotting, which is called a D-dimer test. They each cost under $10. I tried to convince senior colleagues that we have an education campaign on this, but I didn't really get it off the ground. But for all of your listeners who are thinking, oh gosh, I'm not sure about AstraZeneca. I know it's rare, but maybe I can wait for Pfizer. Please don't wait for Pfizer. COVID's a horrible disease. That's the first thing. The second thing is let's all work together to hit the 97% mark and do it in the shortest possible time. Please give our hospitals and the people that work there a break, even 2 or 3 days earlier of the madness that's going on currently in the public hospitals would be a fantastic achievement. There's heaps of AstraZeneca available. It's a very effective vaccine. And it's very, very safe if you just keep an eye out for unusual symptoms and ring your GP immediately if you're concerned. And they have simple screening tests which will make sure that you aren't getting this very rare syndrome.
And treatable almost immediately if, in fact, the GP says, oh, well, hang on, these aren't what they should be, so we better do this, and you'll be fixed. You'll be right as rain.
Yeah, so there's now set up a system where you can either refer somebody directly to the emergency room or you can get in contact with a specialist. But the drugs that are used, one is called intravenous immunoglobulin, and the other is an anticoagulant, are very much available. The immunoglobulin is expensive, but they're very much available and act almost immediately in reversing the process that's about to cause clotting before it's caused that clotting. Headache's probably the most important symptom to look out for. But I've advised people, family, friends, ex-patients, that if you're just feeling odd in a symptom you've never suffered before, for more than a day or so, 4 to 30 days after the AstraZeneca dose, then just get straight onto the blower. The government now advises that if people develop symptoms of this rare syndrome, that the GP either has to get these tests done, and if they can't get a result back in 6 hours, they have to refer the patient to the emergency room. So the system is geared up for this very rare event to make sure that you don't die from it.
Just look, this is Professor Graham Stewart, clinical immunologist at the Westmead Institute, and this is a very instructional conversation, and I'm just in awe of you. But just one thing, we spoke earlier about getting the kids back to school, and there's been a study that says 51 cases of COVID linked to schools and childcare centres between mid-June and July had a higher level of spreading between staff and very low transmission between children themselves, with most children in the study having little or no symptoms. And these are obviously children younger than 12. And one of your colleagues, Professor Christine McCartney, said the report, which focused on New South Wales cases, is consistent with global studies. And so there's a very important message there as we concentrate on getting people over the age of 12 vaccinated about those younger than 12 and what they confront. And again, this is misinformation coming regrettably from Queensland Government in relation to children's health and the serious issues there for children under 12, which is just silly stuff.
Yeah, look, let me say that the safest way, the children, I've read the report, it only came out yesterday, I've read a lot of it. It does give reassurance, but let me say that the safest way forward for young children is for every adult to be vaccinated.
Yes.
And yes, they don't appear to pass the virus too much between each other, but they can pass it on to their teachers, so all of their teachers and other adult staff must be fully vaccinated, and I totally support that. It's not zero illness in children. In fact, 2% in the report ended up in hospital, but at least half of those were there because their parents were too sick to look after them. But even at 1 in 100 ending up in hospital, I think we've got 4 kids under the age of 9 who are in ICU at the moment. And we'd like to see that at zero. And the way to get that to zero is twofold. The first is this year for everybody over the age of 12 and over to be vaccinated. And then into the future, Pfizer and other companies are already doing trials on younger kids, as is AstraZeneca. So I would imagine within a year, if not sooner, we'll be looking at vaccinating the 5 to 11-year-olds and then probably younger than that afterwards. But you have to have clinical trials in large numbers in those age groups. You can't just extrapolate from the safety of the older groups. So, look, I probably wouldn't put it in your words, but I do agree with what you're saying about Queensland. But I wouldn't also say that this is that there's a zero risk for children. And let's, as parents and grandparents, let's just do everything we can to protect our kids. If they're surrounded by adults who are all vaccinated, these kids aren't going to get sick.
Yeah. See, the point being, teenagers, young adults, senior adults, mums, dads, nans and pops, everyone gets vaccinated. The children they're no longer at risk. That's the whole point of it. And yes, there will be in the future a vaccination for them, we hope and pray, but they mightn't need it because we won't have it. Therefore, we can't give it to them. Absolutely. Listen, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate your time. I'm going to impose upon you again sometime in the future because you've now got me at 97%. I'm your 97% man, okay? So that's what I'm going to be pushing from here on in because it's been a most instructional conversation. Thank you for doing it and thank you for your knowledge and the way you've led us, and I'll try and push that message as quickly and possibly as I can.
Thanks very much, Ray. And look, again, where I started, I greatly admire what you're doing, and I think if anyone can get their audience to 97%, it's you, so go for it.
We'll do our best. Thanks, Professor. Wonderful to talk to you. All the best. Professor Graham Stewart, clinical immunologist at the Westmead Institute for Medical Research, clinical professor of medicine in University of Sydney. So I'll say this quite simply, having dealt with someone who's lived their life with these matters, a professor in Graham Stewart. For you dolts out there that want to tell me I don't listen to a talkback shock jock for my medical advice, good. Don't listen to me. Listen to him. Listen to that man, Professor Graham Stewart, the clinical immunologist at the Westmead Institute for Medical Research, clinical professor of medicine at the University of Sydney. Don't listen to Dr. Google. And don't write to me saying, I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but. Get vaccinated and let's get to 97%. Therefore, if teenagers over the age of 12, young adults, mums and dads, nans and pops are all vaccinated, the kids won't get it and won't be in ICU like a few are at the moment under the age of 9. There's a way out of this. Stupidity will get us deeper into trouble. Common sense. So don't listen to the shock jock. Don't listen to me. Listen to Professor Graham Stewart. For God's sake,